Wow, aren't we lucky to have heard that original recording of a battle scene in 1572? I believe it was the Great Battle of Somerset that was won by Sir Saxon Frank, and definitely was not a recording of me in my bedroom with 2 butter knives. Hello and welcome back to the final couplet with me, Theo Cowan. Here we are. We finally made it to Sonnet 8. Only 140 something more to go. I haven't actually looked up how many there are, but I think there's a few. Sonnets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7 all had the same theme, which was making a young man have a child, and I have a sneaking suspicion that Sonnet 8 is going to be exactly the same, but we can always hold out hope that it might be about something else. Either way, we're all having a good time, aren't we? And that's really the reason we're all here, isn't it? Anyway, let's have a listen, shall we? Sonnet 8. Music to hear. Why hearest thou music sadly? Sweets with sweets war not, joy delights in joy. Why lovest thou that which thou receivest not gladly, or else receivest with pleasure thine annoy? If the true concord of well-tuned sounds, by unions married, do offend thine ear, they do but sweetly chide thee, who confounds in singleness the parts that thou shouldst bear. Mark how one string, sweet husband to another, strikes each in each by mutual ordering, resembling sire and child and happy mother, who all in one pleasing note do sing, whose speechless song, being many, seeming one, sings this to thee, thou single wilt prove none. Well, it is indeed about the same thing as Sonnets 1 to 7, but we have a new theme, really, which is, by the sounds of it, music. We've had nature, that clearly didn't work. We've had money, that also didn't work. Why not try good old music? Everyone likes music, everyone understands music. I see where he's going with this, Shakespeare, and I'm into it. Now let's try and work out what the hell Shakespeare was going on about in Sonnet 8. Music to hear. Why hearest thou music sadly? So that's saying, hear that music. It's nice, isn't it? But why is that music making you so sad? Sweets with sweets war not, joy delights in joy. So that's sort of just saying, things that are joyful should make you joyful. So if you're listening to joyful music, that should make you happy, shouldn't it? Why lovest thou that which thou receivest not gladly, or else receivest with pleasure thine annoy? So here he's saying, so why do you love things that make you sad? And why do you like things that annoy you? It's really weird, actually. Who does that? I think that's what he's saying there. If the true concord of well-tuned sounds by unions married do offend thine ear, they do but sweetly chide thee, who confounds in singleness the parts that thou shouldst bear. So here I think he's using the music as a metaphor for not having a kid. So he's saying the music you're listening to is really good. It sounds great. It is in tune. But if you're not hearing it in tune, that's the music telling you that you need to play your own part in it. So you need to get out your flute and join in and make that music sound really nice to you. So it's actually the music telling you that. And in the same vein, that is sort of saying the world is telling you to have a child. If the world doesn't feel right, if something's, not adding up and things are a bit bleak, maybe you need to, get married and have a kid, and then everything will be harmonious. I think that's what he's saying there. Mark how one string, sweet husband to another, strikes each in each by mutual ordering, resembling sire and child and happy mother, who all in one pleasing note do sing. So we're staying on the same theme here, really, aren't we? And he's saying, you notice how these strings, when played together, sounds really nice and creates harmony, I guess. And that is like a father and a child and a happy mother, and they all play together. Maybe the father's on the lute, the mother's on the flute, and the child is holding some maracas, and they're all just playing a lovely little ballad. And isn't that lovely? So now we're on to the final couplet, which is, whose speechless song, being many, seeming one, sings this to thee. Thou single wilt prove none. So as usual, the final couplet is pretty brutal. And it's actually saying, hey, you know that father on the lute and the mother on the flute and the child on the maracas? Well, actually, their music, although they're not speaking and they're not singing, it's actually a warning to you. So that nice sound you heard is actually a warning. And it's saying, if you remain single, you'll be a nobody. You'll prove none. You'll be pathetic. You will have a kid. You will have a wife. You'll be a sad act. So that's nice, isn't it? Thanks, Shakespeare. I think it sort of started off quite nice, and then Shakespeare, as usual, sort of hits home in the last few lines, which we've known him to do quite a few times, haven't we, in the past? But I do quite like the comparison between music and harmony and a family. It's not bad. It's not a bad shout from Shakespeare to do that. Now, let's see where this fits into our story, shall we? If you remember last week, Shakespeare's wife was meeting up with John in Vauxhall Spring Gardens, and John is completely infatuated with her, and she seems pretty into him too. And she's just read Sonnet 7 to him. I wonder what will happen next. Shakespeare's wife finishes reading Sonnet 7 to John. He looks at her for a moment and says, is this just a poem that you've written, or is it directed at me? Is it about me? And Shakespeare's wife says, I don't really want to say. It could be for you, it could be about you, or it could just be a nice little poem. That's for you to decide. And John says, all right then, well, I'm just going to take it as a nice poem, and it's not meant for me. And Shakespeare's wife says, okay, that's fine. Anyway, I must be getting off. And John says, no, please, stay. We've only been together for a couple of minutes and all you've done is read me a poem. And she says, John, listen, I have to tell you something. What? What is it? What do you have to tell me? I have a husband. John looks enraged for a moment, and he says, so you have been deceiving me this whole time? No, John. It's not deception, and also it's only been 3 days, so let's not blow this out of proportion, shall we? And John looks at her in the eye and says, well, you have to make a choice. And Shakespeare's wife said, well, obviously my husband, because I've been with him for years, so I'd be mad to leave him for you. But you are stunning. Okay? You're really hot. So, here's my proposal. I stay with my husband, but I have a nice little affair with you on the side. John thinks about this for a moment and says, I agree to the affair. And he calls over his horse that has been grazing on some nice grass nearby, and he says, hop on, m'lady. And they ride off into the sunset, back to John's house to have a steamy love scene. The next morning, Shakespeare's wife wakes up next to John, and she's thinking, oh God, what have I done? What have I done? I've had an affair with John. I've cheated on Shakespeare. William Shakespeare, the amazing author. She's beside herself. She quickly gets dressed, and John says, where are you going? Please stay a little longer. I have to go back. I'm sorry, John. I have to leave. And he says, will I see you again? And Shakespeare's wife turns to him and says, I don't know. I don't know, John. And she bursts out of the door onto the street, runs and runs for miles because John lives actually quite far away from Shakespeare. Eventually, she arrives at Shakespeare's house, creeps in through the door and up the stairs. She observes Shakespeare asleep in bed and crawls in next to him. He stirs and says, where have you been? And she says, I was up all night persuading John to have a child. And he sits up in bed and says, really? Well, how did it go? And Shakespeare's wife turns to him and says, I think his mind might be turning towards having kids. And Shakespeare says, "Hallelujah! Wow, this is fantastic news." And Shakespeare's wife says, "I think he might need another sonnet in order to help him decide what to do." And Shakespeare says, "Well, of course, of course. I tell you what, give me 5 minutes, I'll knock one out, and then I'll get on to the sonnet." Later that day, Shakespeare hands his wife Sonnet 8 and says, "Well, you must see John again." And she says, "Oh, if I have to. He really does annoy me, though." And Shakespeare says, "Really? Well, I think he's a great guy, but I think he needs to have a kid, and he needs to hear Sonnet 8, all right? So why don't you get out of my hair and read Sonnet 8 to him, for God's sake? You're so annoying." And she says, "All right, Shakespeare." She leaves the house and runs back all the way to John's house. So far, she's done a lot of running today. She's absolutely knackered. She arrives back at John's house, and he says, "Ah, I thought I'd never see you again." And she says, "I couldn't stay away." And they kiss passionately. He says, "Come in. Do you want a coffee?" And she says, "What's that?" And he says, "I don't know, I just made it up. It's this thing that I made up." And it makes you feel energized. She says, "All right then, I'll have a coffee. Thanks, John." He makes a nice espresso. They sit down at the table, and she says, "Listen, John, while I was away, I wrote another sonnet." He said, "Okay, okay. Can I just say, I think you're good. You're good at sonnets, but maybe change the meaning of them a little bit, because they're all quite samey." And she says, "All right, well, I'll take that on board, but can I read this to you?" And he says, "Only if afterwards we can have sex." And she says, "Fine. A fair deal." And she takes out Sonnet 8 from her back pocket and reads, Sonnet 8. "That's nice music. Why does it make you sad? Joyful things should be joyful. I don't really get why you love things that make you unhappy. If music that sounds good and in tune sounds bad to you, it's probably because you need to play your part to make it sound better. When strings are played in harmony, it's like a dad and a kid and a mum all singing together. Their music doesn't have words, but their song is a warning to you, which goes, if you stay single, you'll be a childless loser." Well, when you put it into its modern version, it is pretty brutal, isn't it? Still, you got to do what you got to do, haven't you, to make someone have kids? Anyway, that's enough from me. Until next week, goodbye. John!